Hello everyone and welcome to another video on our own devices. I'm Jun Messier, and you'll recall that a little while ago I made a video on this, the E6B flight computer, aka the Whiz Wheel. Now, while this is by far the most popular design of mechanical flight computers still in use today, it's not the only one, and today we're going to be looking at one of the more popular alternatives to the E6B, the Jeppesen CR-3. Now, as you can see, this differs quite a bit from the E6B, most notably in that it lacks this sliding mechanism for constructing wind triangles. So let's have a closer look at the CR-3 and let me show you how it works and how it differs from the E6B. Now, the CR-3 is manufactured by Jeppesen-Sanderson of Inverness, Colorado. This company was founded in 1934 by Elrey Jeppesen, a pilot working for Varney Airlines. Founded in 1926 in Boise, Idaho by Walter Varney, that same year Varney Airlines became the first company to officially fly airmail for the U.S. Post Office, operating a 740-kilometer route between Pasco, Washington, Boise, and Elko, Nevada. In 1931, Varney was acquired by the United Aircraft and Transport Corporation and merged with Boeing Air Transport, Pacific Air Transport, and National Air Transport to form what would eventually become United Airlines. Elrey Jeppesen was born in 1907 in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and in 1925, at the age of 18, dropped out of high school to pursue his passion for flight. By working various odd jobs, including running a hamburger stand and serving as a ticket taker and wing walker for a local flying circus, he was able to pay for flying lessons, soloing after only 10 minutes instruction and obtaining his pilot's license in 1927. Starting in 1928, he worked briefly as a barnstormer, then for Fairchild Aerial Surveys, flying aerial mapping expeditions over Mexico, before joining Boeing Air Transport in 1930 as an airmail pilot. Now, during this period, aerial navigation methods were very crude. Most airmail pilots relied on commercial automobile road maps or followed railroad tracks and other major landmarks. Jeppesen, however, purchased a 10-cent notebook and began making detailed notes about his routes, including fences, telephone poles, suitable landing areas, the heights and hills, mountains, and other obstacles, and the phone numbers of farmers he could contact for advanced weather reports. Though he only ever intended these notes for personal use, word soon got around about Jeppesen's little black book, and he began selling mimeograph copies to his fellow pilots for $10 apiece. This eventually evolved into the Jeppesen Airway Manual, which included detailed missed approach and other procedures for various airfields. In 1934, Jeppesen founded Jeppesen & Co. in Salt Lake City to mass-produce copies of his manual, as well as specially marked aerial navigation charts, widely known as Jepp charts or simply Jepps to this day. The company moved to Denver in 1941, where it mass-produced maps for the U.S. military. It later expanded its products and services to include other navigation aids like computers, as well as flight training, marine navigation, and weather monitoring services. Elrey Jeppesen sold the company to the Times Mirror Company in 1961, staying on as chairman until his death in 1996 at the age of 89. In 1974, Times Mirror merged Jeppesen with its Sanderson Films flight training subsidiary to form Jeppesen-Sanderson, which in 2000 was acquired by Boeing. Jeppesen currently employs around 3,200 people and has offices around the world, including in Germany, Italy, the UK, Sweden, Poland, and Australia. Now, in the early 2000s, the company was also revealed to have aided the CIA in planning its extraordinary rendition flights of suspected terrorists to overseas black sites, but that is a subject far beyond the scope of this video. Now, a lot of mechanical flight computers in common use make use of a slide for constructing the wind triangle. These include Dalton-style computers like this E6B, as well as the Addison and Luard, Gudime, Lefkovich, Plath, Sterligau, Coutinho, and the Gore. However, many other designs accomplish the same function using more compact circular mechanisms, including the Nehmeyer, Vittori, Avionaut, Knightson, Plumley, and many, many more. Now, all of these work in different ways and are a little bit beyond the scope of this video, though if I do come across examples of them, I will be covering them in their own videos on this channel. But for the moment, we'll just focus on the functioning of the CR-3. Now, the printing on this computer states that this was patented in 1955 by one Ray Lahr. However, this only appears to be true of the wind triangle true course mechanism. The rest of the computer appears to be based on a patent by Franz Huber, filed the same year. Anyway, as with the E6B, this has two sides to it, each with different functions. One side is very similar to that on the E6B, but for the sake of completeness, let's break it down anyway. So the first and simplest type of calculation you can do is for time, speed, distance, a function shared by pretty much every navigation computer, including maritime models like the one I covered in a previous video. Link, as always, in the description. These calculations are carried out using the outer dial. And by the way, the units on this dial can be used for any system of units, kilometers, miles per hour, knots, etc., and can apply to any order of magnitude. For example, 20 can stand for 20, 2, 0.2, 200, etc. You just need to decide ahead of time which scale applies. So, for example, if we are traveling at a ground speed of 200 miles per hour and have traveled 300 statute miles, to find the time elapsed, we move the time index, this arrow, across from 200, or in this case 20, then look across from 300 miles, or in this case 30, to find our answer, 90 minutes. Alternatively, if we have traveled a distance of 210 statute miles in 50 minutes, to find our ground speed, we align 210 on the outer dial, or in this case 21, across from 50 on the inner dial, then look across the time index to find our answer, 252 miles per hour. Finally, if we travel at a ground speed of 480 knots for 32 seconds, to find our distance traveled, we align the time index with 480, or 48, on the outer disk, and look across from 32 on the inner dial to find our answer, 256 nautical miles. You can also use these same scales to calculate fuel consumption. You just have to substitute gallons or liters per hour for miles or kilometers per hour or knots. The dial also includes a number of arrows for converting between various units. For example, nautical miles near 66, statute miles near 76, kilometers near 12, imperial gallons near 11, US gallons near 13, liters near 48, feet near 14 on the outside scale, meters near 44 on the inside scale, pounds near 36 on the outside scale, and kilograms near 16 on the inside scale. There are two ways of using these. For example, to convert 40 nautical miles to statute miles, you can align the nautical arrow on either dial with the statute arrow on the opposite dial, then read across 40 to get the answer of 46 statute miles. Alternatively, you can align the nautical arrow with 40 and read the answer opposite the statute arrow on the same dial. There are also two arrows on the outside dial for determining the weight of fuel and oil in pounds near 77 and 96 respectively. Finally, there is a Fahrenheit-Celsius conversion scale on the inner dial, but this can be read directly and doesn't require moving the dial itself. Moving on, we go to the inner dial to convert between different types of altitudes, specifically indicated altitude, which is what appears on the altimeter, calibrated altitude, which is indicated altitude corrected for errors induced by the construction of the instrument itself and the placement of the pedostatic system, i.e. position error. Density altitude, which is calibrated altitude corrected for non-standard atmospheric conditions. Indicated altitude is based on the international standard atmosphere, which may not always match reality due to varying barometric pressure, temperature, and humidity. For example, at higher temperatures, the density will be lower and thus equivalent to a higher altitude in the standard atmosphere. Density altitude would thus be higher than indicated or calibrated altitude. True altitude, which is the actual altitude above mean sea level or MSL. Pressure altitude, which is altitude measured from a standard datum of 101.3 kilopascals or 29.92 inches of mercury, which typically corresponds to mean sea level. Indeed, when the atmospheric pressure at mean sea level is 101.3 kilopascals, then true and pressure altitude will be identical. And finally, height, which is the actual altitude above the ground below. For example, if our pressure altitude is 10,000 feet, our calibrated altitude 9,000 feet, the true air temperature minus 20 degrees Celsius, and the altitude of the local ground station 5,000 feet, to find our density altitude, we use this double window below the Jeppesen logo. We align minus 20 degrees on the lowest scale with 10,000 feet in the lower window, then read the density altitude from the top window, 12,000 feet. Next, we subtract our ground station altitude from our calibrated altitude to get calibrated altitude above the ground. 9,000 minus 5,000 equals 4,000 feet. Then, without touching anything, we find 4,000 feet, or in this case 40, on the outside scale, and across it on the inside scale we read our true altitude, 3,780 feet. We then add our true altitude above the ground to the station altitude to get our true altitude above mean sea level, 8,780 feet. The next calculation we can perform is converting indicated airspeed, what appears on the airspeed indicator, into true airspeed. As an aircraft flies faster or through denser air, compression and friction generates heat, which affects the readings of the pedostatic system. The effects of altitude and airspeed must thus be compensated for. Now, an interesting feature on the CR-3 is the rotating transparent cursor, which features both a straight and two curved cursor lines. These compensate for what is known as the temperature recovery coefficient, or CT, which measures how much of a fluid flow's kinetic energy is converted to heat at a given surface, or in this case, the efficiency of the aircraft's temperature probe. This varies from aircraft to aircraft, but does not vary significantly with airspeed and altitude. On this cursor, the straight line is for a CT of 0.8, while the curved lines are for a CT of 1.0, the solid line for a standard stratosphere temperature of minus 55 degrees Celsius, and the dashed line for a standard sea level temperature of plus 15 degrees Celsius. For all other altitudes, measurements must be interpolated between the two lines. The CR-3 can also compensate for compression and frictional heating at higher airspeeds, which can produce artificially high indicated air temperatures. For example, if our calibrated airspeed is 276 knots, our pressure altitude is 10,000 feet, our indicated air temperature is 0 degrees Celsius, and our aircraft CT value is 1.0, we first align 276 in the long circular window with 10,000 on the scale directly below, then rotate our cursor and place the curved line on the intersection of the curve and the 0 degree isotherm. We then go to the cursor arrow to find our temperature rise, 13 degrees. This means our actual outside temperature is minus 13 degrees Celsius. Anyway, if our calibrated airspeed is 400 knots, our pressure altitude 15,000 feet, and our indicated air temperature 30 degrees Celsius, to find our true airspeed, we first place our calibrated airspeed of 400 knots in this long circular window opposite our pressure altitude of 15,000 feet on the scale immediately below. We then take our cursor and align whichever line is appropriate for our altitude, airspeed, and the aircraft CT value, in this case the dashed line for sea level, with the intersection of this arc and the isotherm line corresponding to our air temperature, 30 degrees Celsius. We then go to the cursor arrow and read off our true airspeed, 500 knots. Next, this little window below the isotherms allows us to convert between true airspeed and Mach number, that is, airspeed relative to the local speed of sound, which varies only with temperature. For example, if the indicated Mach number on the Mach meter is 1.16 and the indicated air temperature is plus 10 degrees Celsius, to find true airspeed, we align this arrow at the bottom of the Mach number window with 1.16, align our cursor with the intersection of the curve and the plus 10 degrees isotherm, and finally go to the cursor arrow and read off our answer, 675 knots. However, if the aircraft only has a conventional airspeed indicator, indicated or calibrated airspeed must first be converted to Mach number before true airspeed can be found. For example, if our calibrated airspeed is 280 knots, our pressure altitude is 14,500 feet, and our true air temperature is minus 15 degrees Celsius, we first align 280 in the long circular window with 14,500 feet on the scale below, then read off the Mach number in that window of 0.55. We then rotate our lower pressure altitude window until we reach the Mach index arrow and align it with minus 15 degrees Celsius. We then go to the inner scale on the outer disk and look across from our Mach number, 0.55, or in this case 55, to find our answer, 345 knots. So that's about it for the calculator side of the CR3, which, as I said, is very similar to the one on the E6B, but it's on the other side that things get interesting. As you can see, this lacks the slide that the E6B has for constructing wind triangles. Rather, this uses a more compact circular mechanism. So let me show you how that works. Now, there are two things to note here. The first is that two different scales are provided to account for higher or lower wind speeds. The operating procedure is the same for both. The second is that while wind triangles are always constructed in terms of true course, an aircraft's magnetic compass will necessarily display a magnetic course. However, the CR3 allows you to easily convert from magnetic to true course provided the local magnetic variation is known. And to learn more about that, again, please check out my video on the nautical Polaris and the course corrector, link in the description. For example, if our magnetic course is 284 degrees and our magnetic variation is 14 degrees east, we align 284 on the green scale on the inner or topmost disk with 14 degrees on the left or east side of the true course or TC index arrow, then read across the TC index to get our true course, 298 degrees. This follows the classic navigation addition rule given by the mnemonic cadet. When going from compass to true bearing, add east air. Anyway, as with the E6B, the CR3 can be used to perform a number of wind triangle calculations. For instance, given a certain crosswind, you can calculate the crab angle at which you must fly to maintain your desired course. For example, imagine a flight consisting of two legs. The first leg is to be flown at a true airspeed of 180 miles per hour and a magnetic course of 140 degrees. The local magnetic variation is 10 degrees west, and the wind is 40 miles per hour from 100 degrees true. To find our crab angle, we first align the true airspeed or TAS index with 180 miles per hour, or in this case 18, on the outer dial. Then convert our magnetic course to true course as before by aligning 140 degrees on the inner green scale with 10 degrees on the right or west side of the TC index to get our answer, 130 degrees. Next, like on the E6B, we find our wind dot at the intersection of the 100-degree radial line on the inner disk and the 40 miles per hour concentric circle, and mark this using a pencil. Now, if we read vertically down from this dot, we find we have a left crosswind component of 20 miles per hour. If we look across from 20 on the outer scale, we see that this corresponds to a 6-degree crab angle. To the left, of course, as we are compensating for left crosswind. We subtract this from our desired magnetic heading of 140 degrees to get our true magnetic heading, 134 degrees. We can also read horizontally from our wind dot to find we have a headwind component of 35 miles per hour. Subtracting this from our true airspeed of 180 miles per hour gives our ground speed, 145 miles per hour. Now, as I mentioned, this is a 2-leg trip with our second leg to be flown at a true airspeed of 180 miles per hour as before, but along a magnetic course of 186 degrees. Local magnetic variation is now 11 degrees west, while the wind is still 40 miles per hour from 100 degrees true. As our true airspeed is the same, we leave our outer dial alone and instead rotate our inner dial to align our magnetic course of 186 degrees with our variation of 11 degrees west to get our true course of 175 degrees. We can then read the vector components of our original wind dot, 39 miles per hour left crosswind and 10 miles per hour headwind. This gives a crab angle of 15 degrees left and a ground speed of 170 miles per hour. However, such figures are just approximate for crab angles over 10 degrees, so we must thus look to the left of the TAS index at this black effective true airspeed or ETAS scale. We look across from the crab angle of 15 degrees to read our ETAS of 176 miles per hour. We then subtract the headwind of 10 miles per hour from this to get a more accurate ground speed of 166 miles per hour. So that is really quite slick. I kind of like this thing. Now, of course, those calculations are only possible if you know the winds ahead of time, and of course, these may shift while you are in flight. Thankfully, however, you can use this to determine the direction and velocity of the wind while in the air. So, for example, let's assume our true airspeed is 180 miles per hour, true course over the ground is 175 degrees, true heading as indicated by our compass is 160 degrees, and our ground speed is 144 miles per hour. These figures can be determined in a variety of ways, for example, using GPS or radio navigation aids or by measuring the movement of ground features with a drift sight, an instrument I've already covered in a previous video, linked in the description. Anyway, as before, we align our TAS index with 180, then set the TC index at 175. We then subtract our true heading from our true course to get our crab angle of 15 degrees, in this case the left, meaning our wind is coming from the left. As this angle is greater than 15 degrees, we must find our effective true airspeed, in this case 174 miles per hour. Next, we subtract our ground speed from our ETAS to get our headwind component, 30 miles per hour, and draw a line horizontally from 30 on the headwind scale. Then we read across 15 degrees on the crosswind scale to find our crosswind component of 47 miles per hour. Finally, we find and mark the intersection of 47 miles per hour and our 30 miles per hour crosswind, which gives a wind of 55 miles per hour from 118 degrees true. And these same functions can also be used to determine true course and ground speed, as well as true heading and airspeed. For example, if our true airspeed is 156 miles per hour, our magnetic heading is 289 degrees, our local magnetic variation is 7 degrees west, and the wind is 40 miles per hour from 180 degrees true, to find our true course and ground speed, we first place the TAS index across from 156, then set the magnetic heading 289 on the green scale across from 7 degrees on the left or west side of the TC index. This gives our true heading of 282 degrees, but not yet our true course. Next, we mark our wind dot at the intersection of the 180 degree radial line and the 40 miles per hour circle, then read up from this on the crosswind scale to find we have a left crosswind component of 39 miles per hour. We then look across from 39 on the outer dial to find our crab angle of 14 degrees. Next, we rotate the green scale to align the 282 degree true heading with 14. The TC index now points towards an approximate true course of 296. Now, this movement has changed our crosswind component from 39 to 36 miles per hour. So again, we look at 36 on the outer scale and find that our crab angle is actually 13 degrees. We thus back off the green scale by 1 degree to get our actual true course of 295 degrees. Now, since our crab angle is again over 10 degrees, we again need to use the ETAS scale to find our effective true airspeed, in this case 152 miles per hour. Reading horizontally from our wind dot yields a tailwind component of 17 miles per hour, so we add 17 to 152 miles per hour to get our ground speed, 169 miles per hour. Alternatively, if our true course is 56 degrees, our desired ground speed is 166 knots, and the wind is 45 knots from 120 degrees true, to find our true airspeed and heading needed to maintain that course and ground speed, we first align the TC index with 56 degrees, then locate our wind dot at the intersection of the 120-degree line and the 45-knot circle, in this case halfway between the 40 and 50-knot circles. Reading left across from this dot reveals a headwind component of 20 knots. This means the effective true airspeed required to maintain a ground speed of 166 knots is 166 plus 20, or 186 knots. Thus, we place the TAS index across from 186. Reading down from the wind dot now reveals a right wind component of 40 knots. If we read across from 40 on the outer scale, we get a crab angle of 12 degrees. Since this is greater than 10 degrees, we must again use the ETAS scale, move 186 knots across from 12 degrees. However, if we look back to the outer scale, we see that 40 still lies within the 12-degree arc, so our crab angle remains unchanged and no further adjustment is required. But now the TAS index points towards our final answer, 190 knots. Finally, we find our crab angle of 12 degrees on the right or west side of the TC index to find our true heading, 68 degrees. And finally, should we find ourselves flying off course, the CR-3 can also be used to determine the angular correction needed to reach our destination. So, for example, if we have flown 40 miles, have drifted 5 miles off course, and there are 160 miles remaining to our destination, to find our course correction angle, we align the TAS index across from 40 miles, then find 5 miles, or in this case 50, on the outer scale and read across from it to find the angular adjustment needed to parallel our original course, in this case 7 degrees. Now, to find the additional course correction needed to reach our destination, we align the TAS index with 160 miles, or in this case 16, then find 5 miles on the outer scale and read across from it on the inner scale. Now, there are two scales here, an outer one reading 18 degrees and an inner one reading approximately 1 3/4 degrees. Intuitively, since we are only 5 miles off course, the correct answer should be closer to the second option, so we round up to 2 degrees and add this to our correction to parallel to get our final course correction, 9 degrees. And that, dear viewers, is a brief overview of the Jeppesen CR-3 flight computer. Now, there are a number of older versions of the same basic design, the CR-1 and the CR-2, which have a few fewer functions than this particular model. There's also the CR-5, which has a much more compact 3 3/4 inch diameter. Now, as I said before, there are a whole bunch of other flight computers that work in various ways, and if I do manage to track down some of those, then I will definitely feature them in videos on this channel. In the meantime, sorry for the delay in putting out videos this month. I've been very busy with the very successful run of my play If Day at the Winnipeg Fringe Theatre Festival. This is a madcap comedy based on the real-life event on February 19th, 1942, when my hometown of Winnipeg pretended to be invaded by the Nazis in order to sell war bonds. Yes, that actually happened. Now, I actually managed to film the performance, so hopefully after September, I should be able to put it up online and you'll get to see it for yourself, so please look out for that. Anyways, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time in another video where we'll look at yet more fascinating navigational instruments and other devices just like this. Until then, I'm Jeppesen CR from Our Own Devices. Have a great day.